Scuba diving can be a thrilling experience, exploring a hidden world full of beauty and mystery. The draw of the ocean brings thousands of people year-round to dive and explore these undiscovered landscapes. However, the ocean can be a dangerous and unforgiving place. High amounts of inexperienced divers, lack of underwater communication, and unpredictable ocean conditions cause diving to be a highly dangerous sport, causing on average 200 divers to pass away each year. In today's video, we are going to explore 3 fatal scuba diving cases, investigating what happened on the day of the disaster. You are watching Lesser Known History. Four scuba divers were involved in the 1973 Mount Gambier cave diving tragedy at a flooded sinkhole called the Shaft, close to Mount Gambier in South Australia. The divers were siblings Stephen and Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts and John Bockerman. Without a reference point and going beyond their own predetermined boundaries, the 4 divers got lost and drowned after running out of oxygen. They are the only known fatalities at the location as of May 2015. All of the bodies were found over the course of the following year, and the incident had a significant impact on the development of the South Australian Police Underwater Recovery Squad, the restriction of access to cave diving locations in Australia, and the later formation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia. The entrance to the sinkhole, known as the Shaft, was found in 1938 in Thompson's paddock on a farm near Allendale East, just south of Mount Gambier in South Australia. To allow for exploration, the hole was widened to about 1 metre in diameter. A local diver made the first trip into the cave in the 1960s, descending to a depth of 21 metres. The name given to this underwater cave was inspired by the brilliant shaft of sunlight that on a sunny day passes through the entrance to the depths. Now that we have a brief history and summary of the event, let's dig deeper into what happened on the day of the disaster. 9 divers travelled to Mount Gambier, South Australia on May 26, 1973, with the goal of cave diving at the Shaft. The opening of this location leads to a sizable underwater cavern that is well known among divers for its crystal clear water and intriguing interior structure. 8 divers were planning to enter the cave: John Bockerman, Pete Burr, Christine Millott, Glenn Millott, Stephen Millott, Larry Reynolds, Gordon Roberts, and Robert Smith. Joanne Harper, the 9th member of the group, had made the decision not to dive and elected to remain at the entrance of the cave. The group successfully completed a dive at the sinkhole the day before the accident, extending a shot line about 150 feet into the water and reaching the main point of interest, known as the rock pile, a central pile of limestone debris about 40 meters directly below the sinkhole entrance. Before coming to the surface, the group quickly explored the rock pile's perimeter. The crew intended to return the next morning to continue investigating the cavern with their shot line already in place. On the morning of May 28th, the party travelled to the sinkhole and rapidly descended to the rock pile after filling their oxygen tanks at Mount Gambier. According to the divers' accounts, they did not want to go past the edge, a short and downward sloping extension off the main chamber's tunnel that is far from the shaft of natural light offered by the sinkhole entrance. While the initial drop proceeded without any problems, the 8 divers made a number of errors. They were not equipped with sufficient air management techniques. The shot line did not reach the bottom of the cavern, and there were no additional air tanks. The divers had not been assigned specific diving partners, and no safety lines were used. Glenn Millott later said that this was because using 8 individual lines in such a small area would have put the divers at risk. With the aid of former Chief Superintendent Wallace B. Budd, various stories from the 4 living divers were put together to create a timeline of the 4 deaths. Smith started to experience the effects of nitrogen narcosis at the edge of the rock pile. Smith, a seasoned diver who was aware with the signs of narcosis, decided to return to the rock pile, while the remaining divers continued to explore the cavern. Smith remained near the rock pile and circled it in search of animal bones for around 8 minutes. After this, he spotted Glenn Millott's torch as he rose to the surface. He was running low on oxygen and had tried to warn other divers of this before he ended his dive. Pete Burr and Larry Reynolds also resurfaced around this time. leaving Stephen, Christine Millot, Roberts, and Brockerman unaccounted for. Glenn Millot promptly put on a spare tank and headed back underwater to search for the remaining divers, along with Pete Burr. At the edge of a cliff, at a depth of around 225 feet, Glenn Millot discovered Stephen's torch and camera. There was a large amount of silt suspended in the water, indicating that the divers had been thrashing around in panic. When the planned dive came to an end, the remaining divers turned around to head back to the surface and noticed Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts making a hasty ascent back to the rock pile. In their panic, as their air supply began to run out, they swam straight up rather than along the path that they had descended. The two divers became trapped under a dome, and as a result, they started suffering from nitrogen narcosis, and their surroundings were so murky that they could not see very far. It is likely that they suffocated shortly afterwards. According to reports, Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts may have been holding hands as they realized they were going to die and could not escape their fate. Stephen Millot, the fourth fatality of the dive, was found under an overhang at a depth of 50 feet. Very little is known about his final moments. However, it is likely that he became disorientated and trapped, much like Millot and Roberts. David John Shaw, an Australian scuba diver, technical diver, and Cathay Pacific Airline pilot, was born on July 20th, 1954. Shaw was a prolific diver, setting multiple diving records in his 5 years as a scuba diver. On the 28th of October 2004, his first dive at the underwater cave known as Bushman's Hole in South Africa, Shaw broke 4 diving records. On this particular dive, he also came across the remains of another diver named Dion Dreyer, who had perished a decade earlier in 1994, after failing to secure Dreyer's remains. Shaw made it his goal to bring the body back to the surface. On the 8th of January 2005, Dave Shaw once again returned to Bushman's Hole in an attempt to retrieve Dreyer's remains. He used an underwater camera to record his dive to a depth of 270 meters, which allowed experts to analyze what went wrong with the dive. Shaw began to encounter problems when Dreyer's body unexpectedly started to float. This was due to the fact that his body had transformed into adipocere, a soap-like substance that floats inside of his wetsuit. Shaw was using both hands as he was working and had his light laying on the cave floor. The lines attached to Shaw's light became tangled around him, causing him to panic. As a result, he died, trying to free himself from the lines that were attached around him, running out of oxygen. 3 days later, as the dive team was retrieving the gear, both of the remains that had become tangled in the lines were hauled up just below the surface. The terrifying footage of Shaw's descent was later salvaged and used to determine the cause of his death. Dave Shaw left behind a wife and 2 children, and will always be remembered for his amazing diving ability and courage in the attempt at retrieving Dreyer's body from Bushman's Hole. In 1976, a group of submerged caverns beneath the famous Blue Hole near Santa Rosa, New Mexico were sealed off after 2 divers from Oklahoma became lost and perished. In 2016, however, several expert divers were granted permission to explore the labyrinth of caves beneath the seal that had been put in place 40 years earlier. Shane Thompson, a San Diego-based scuba diving instructor, and his colleague Mike Young had spent time searching for passageways and crevices in the Blue Hole as part of an expedition by the ADM Exploration Foundation in March of 2016. Thompson was a skilled diver who had been practicing the sport when he was a small child while living in the Florida Keys, before launching a number of diving businesses that involved boat repair, salvage work, and training. At one point during their dive in the Blue Hole, Thompson followed Young into a narrow tunnel 194 feet below the surface. It was determined later that Thompson had been instructed to not enter this chamber, but went in anyway. This is where things started to go very badly for the 2 divers. Young began to leave the area while following a safety line, but there was no visibility due to the kicked up silt. In a panic, Thompson pulled on the rope so hard that Young's hands lost control of it. Due to poor visibility, Thompson swam upwards into Young, trapping both men in the small cavern. Young managed to swim away, but Thompson continued upwards, becoming trapped in a dead-end passageway. Unfortunately, he was already dead by the time he was located by Young a short time after. After the disaster, authorities deemed this section of the Blue Hole too dangerous and announced that no more exploration would take place, so as to avoid further deaths. These cases bring to light only a few of the diving accidents that happen every year, showing us how simple mistakes and changes to conditions can drastically impact a dive, resulting in injury or death. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. This has been Lesser Known History.